We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
Software development, going back to the Apple II, enjoys creating software that delight people, particular focus on usability. And tonight he's going to be talking about effective software delivery and help us understand what effective really means. So Dave, switch computers and it's all yours.
Hello everybody, thanks for having me. I've been down a few times, actually a lot of familiar faces here. I was down at Deep Agile back last November. I've been in Agile games and such, and been down here a few times, so it's good to be here again. And plan to spend the weekend here and enjoy Boston hospitality. As David said, I've been building software since I had dark hair. And actually when I started building software, I had one or two white hairs, but I had about as many as many white hairs then as I have dark hairs now. So it's been a while. I didn't realize until quite a while later that I was very fortunate early in, well, even before it was a professional career. I was always building software that wasn't just something to throw away. I did some little things, but I was always building stuff that somebody needed to help them out with something. And the first quote-unquote business system that I wrote was to track basketball stats for the coach. I played basketball back then, but the coach saw that I was also a computer geek. It was a very small school. You couldn't just belong to one clique. You had to spread yourself around a bit. And he said, can you write something to track the stats? And I said, I don't know. I'll find out. And I'd throw something together and say, how does this look? That's okay. Well, can it do this? And I'd say, I don't know. And then go and do it. And we did this constant back and forth over a number of weeks until we had something that he could use constantly to track the stats for several teams that he coached. And it never occurred to me that that was something special, the fact that I could actually speak to the stakeholder and get feedback as often as I possibly could, sometimes on the order of minutes, if it was something small, or hours, or maybe the next day sort of thing. And like I said, I went from there through university and summers when I was working in places where I just was always very close to the people who were consuming the software and was able to get feedback, constantly tweak stuff as we went along, and just got into this mode of thinking that was how you build software. Then I got to the real world. And the real world is a funny place, as I'm sure you're all aware. Over the years, I saw a lot of things that didn't work, but I've seen a lot of things that do. I was working with a team that could arguably have been called Agile in 1992. Co-located with the business, relative estimation, all these different things, constant feedback, and they were a very, very effective team. So effective that they were disbanded, as is often the case. But again, I saw these things, the way that the groups were working, and I guess I had an eye for process even back then. The way that these groups were working then, and other areas that I worked that I would deem as effective, and conversely areas that I didn't see as effective, making note of how they worked. And there were certain aspects, certain patterns that I picked up, and whether it's a technical way of working with code or a way of organizing the group, saw these patterns develop over time. Then in late 2000, found out about this thing called XP, and immediately recognized a whole pile of patterns in what I read about XP. While I was actually reading about this stuff on, it wasn't even a Google search back then, hadn't heard of them yet, I was actually pairing with somebody else while we were doing some design work and some code work. We were pair programming, just like it was described. Now, system metaphor, I've never done that one before, but that was the one that nobody seems to have really followed and kind of quietly dropped off the edge. But a lot of XP really, really spoke to me as a software practitioner, and that's why I latched right onto it and have been there ever since. I've done a lot of process work, but I haven't written a line of code since this morning. So it's been a long day. It was about 9:45 this morning. I still like to solve problems with code and solve problems that are going to help people out. The story I want to tell you to carry that on is around this whole notion of what's effective. And back in 2012, I started working with a startup company called Shopify. Has anybody ever heard of Shopify? Yeah, cool. It's effectively an e-commerce platform. You want to create your own online store. This isn't, they're not competing directly with Amazon. They're getting the people who have their little boutique store, or people who want to sell t-shirts online. And in fact, one of the executives in the company, that's how he started. He was selling t-shirts, he wanted to sell t-shirts online, and he created a Shopify store and became part of the company. It was a very effective company. They are doing fantastic. And I went in there, my role, we didn't want to call it Agile Coach, because that had certain baggage associated with it. So I was actually called Sherpa. My role was to make sure everybody else gets to the summit of the mountain and gets all the glory, and I'm a footnote in history. Did a great job in the footnote in history part, but that's okay. That was my role from the start. When I went in there, it was to try to work with the development teams, try to get not so much discipline, but improve their technical skills around quality and process and all these the different aspects of agility as we know it, be it through Scrum, Kanban, or however they're going to do it. And I did, and I was working with lots of these teams, and over time, I started to get a little concerned about the defects, the number of defects that were growing in a very, very large code base. Now we're talking about a massive code base and on the order of 300 or 400 defects. That's not, I've seen worse. I've seen where on a code base smaller than that has been in the 5,000 range. So this wasn't by any stretch of imagination the end of the world. But as my role, it was to point out, I was elephant in the room guy. That's an elephant, I don't see anything. That's an elephant, I don't see anything. And I grated on some nerves, but was still working at, come on, we gotta get the quality up, we gotta get the quality up. Now this isn't a company with a culture stated by, again, from the executives who were, the executive who hadn't written a line of code since this morning, the CEO, very, very excellent programmer, as well as a business person. And their mantra was, move fast and break things. Now, what he means by move fast and break things was a little different than, say, third generation people in the company. Oh, we can break stuff, that's great. So we can go ahead and do that. But I was getting concerned about the long-term impact of these defects. The company literally growing exponentially, and their number of customers growing exponentially, and I was afraid there would be a certain herd effect at some point in time where they get to a point where there were so many defects and people were so disgusted with the product that it wouldn't just level out, it would tank. I worked with them for quite a while, almost 2 years, and left early this year in January. And when I came out, I thought one of the things that as a Shopify employee you have is your own store. You're expected to actually create your own store, either for testing or to actually sell stuff. And quite a few people, there are people who are actually making good money outside of Shopify, selling stuff with their Shopify store while they're employees. But I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll go ahead and create my store, and I use it as my website. But I also have the Agile store there, and it's got some kind of fun stuff that if you ever have a look, just Google for the Agile store and you'll find it. I had gone from being the person running the quality guild, and in one session where we were talking about exploratory testing, we sat down, there were a bunch of us in the room, I think we split up into six pairs, and in 15 minutes found 14 defects, without even trying. And none of them had been reported before. That was concerning. Leave the company, start creating my own store, and over the space of about 2 weeks of getting everything together, products and payment gateways, and all this stuff together, I didn't encounter one. So I have me scratching my chin, my head, elbows, you name it. And it occurred to me that when my perspective was that of somebody who is supposed to be very, I gotta think about quality, that when that was my perspective, that everything looked like a bug, everything was terrible, gotta get these things cleaned up. But as a merchant, if I'm not encountering those bugs, are they really important? Now, depending on what the merchants were doing, I knew issues that, because I worked in the code. I wasn't just there as a process coach, I was hands-on in development as well. My code was perfect, of course. And I knew how to break things, but I didn't have to run into anything in the day-to-day use of the system as a merchant. I didn't run into anything that didn't work. It worked just fine. So, different perspectives yielded different results. And this was about the time I was starting to think about what is it about software that I've seen over nearly 30 years, well 30 plus years since I first started writing software, but 25 plus as a professional developer. What are the things that are effective? And it's not just, read the XP books and do the practices 12, then 13 later on of XP. It's not just following Steve McConnell's stuff from Code Complete. It's not just all these different things that are rather prescriptive. Even from a process perspective, following Scrum, which is relatively loose, but can also, Scrum is a bit of a paradox. There are parts of it that it's left up to you, and parts of it you have to do it exactly like this. And it's kind of funny that way. But when you get down to it, there's a lot of context lost when you're reading that book. I will say when I read the XP books, the person I said I was pairing with at the time went to a local bookstore because I don't think Amazon really was, I don't think we could actually ship to Canada at the time. And we went to this bookstore that had a very good collection of IT books. And these two XP books were way up on the top shelf. He's taller than me, so he grabbed the white book and then grabbed the pink book for me. And so I read the pink book first. Pink book, it just happened to work out perfectly that my way of learning is very much the way the pink book was in terms of the pink XP book, which is XP installed, which is, here's a little bit of theory, and here's how we did it. And that resonates with me a lot better because they explained why they did specific things in a little more the context of how they were working than in Kent's original book, the original white book of XP, which XP explained, which is a bit more theoretical. And so that's how I got into this whole thing. But I'm still thinking, okay, well here are these practices. I've used a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of them in different forms. Do they apply everywhere? People are trying to say they apply everywhere. There were zealots, and I probably bordered on zealotry at some point in time in the early 2000s, where, you gotta do this everywhere, you gotta do this everywhere. And I actually got it working. The very first project that I did with XP was in government. And it wasn't greenfield, it was maintenance on an existing system. It worked great. Did some greenfield stuff in private sector, not so great. Everybody's saying that it only works in the private sector, small teams on greenfield systems, but I just saw that not work so well. And you can't do it with maintenance, and you can't do it in the public sector, but that worked great. And all these different paradoxes constantly. What's going on here? Well, again, it all comes back to what's effective. In the case of Shopify, what was effective with them, or is effective with them, is that the quality is good enough. They use a continuous delivery model. They are pushing to production anywhere from 12 to 24 times a day. Constantly getting new stuff, new features, bug fixes if they're there, getting those out to production. Every now and again they have bigger initiatives. They replace the admin module. They're putting in different big features. And those aren't continuously delivered. kept off to the side, or they use feature flags so that it's actually there, but it's not turned on for anybody until it gets to a point where they can put it in beta. That works really, really well for them. If there is a significant problem, they can either roll back to the previous deployment, because the problem wasn't there, you know that it was the last deployment that broke something, or they can quickly deploy something else that fixes the problem. And that's business agility. They can adapt to things as quickly as they need to, and that's great for them. They are effective versus following Agile. They had about 20 teams, 20 or 22 teams when I was there. Not one of there were no two teams that were using the same process. And I think that's very telling. It's not a case of, well, the whole company has to go Agile, and everybody has to follow the same process. And it's all from this book, thunk. Each team figured out what worked best for them. It's quite likely they could get better. One of the big things that I did there was introduce retrospectives and make sure that they're reflecting constantly on their work to make sure that, again, they're getting better at how they work and what they put out. But here's this company kicking butt. If they break something, they can recover very quickly, get stuff out. Life is wonderful. Would you want the company that writes the software for the 911 system to do that? No. I flew in today from Cleveland on an airliner built in Brazil. I don't want those software developers using that model. Thank you very much. But a continuous delivery model could probably be applied to a telecom system. It can be applied to lots of other different things. We see a lot of desktop software now, constantly getting updates. And being connected is relatively normal now, as opposed to 20 years ago. So all these effective practices, they're going to depend on the business domain, among other things. They're going to depend on the people. You may have different groups in the same business domain, but they work differently because the people are different. The group dynamics are different. The company dynamics are different. So why are we looking for effective? Did anybody here, before Agile as a term was created in February 2001, did anybody here ever ship software successfully? Yeah, it's amazing. I wrote a blog post a number of years ago as one that's one of the most read, and it was called Waterfall Works. So it does. You cannot deny that a waterfall approach to software works, because so much software has been shipped over decades with a waterfall approach, and it's been successful from a business perspective. Now, the assumptions behind waterfall, when it was, I was in a month away from starting kindergarten when Winston Royce's paper came out that effectively defined it. And the way he defined it was completely different from what people saw. They just saw a diagram on page 2 of his paper and ignored the rest. And in 1970, when that paper came out before this conference he was going to, it was a little different than the computing environment now. They sent people to the moon. NASA sent people to the moon with less computing power than that. Probably less computing power than Pointer. If it took you a couple of hours to submit a batch job of punch cards, if it took a couple of hours to find out if that even compiled, let alone ran, and let alone ran properly, you were going to do a lot of design up front. You're going to review that code before you punch those cards. You're going to do a lot of things to make sure, you're going to do a lot of upfront work to make sure, because it costs so much in terms of time to find out whether you were wrong. And that was one of the fundamental things about Agile that, and XP originally, is that the cost of change curve was flattened. And not so much because of XP. Part of it was just the environment's so much different. So what was effective when people created waterfall, or that approach to it, is not necessarily what's effective now. And we see this all the time now, that people are becoming more cognizant of the fact that it's different. So, and that's what I say here, there must have been something good in what people did, even designing everything up front. There's a reason for that. Well, it was very costly. And every business domain, organization, team is different. Why? They have different people. And every person is different. Even individual people are different within the same day. Does anybody here have days where you could go 12 hours and barely even notice the passage of time? You're there, everything's great. And then the next day or some other day, you're good for 4 hours and you're just a waste for that rest of that time. You may as well just go home. I have those days like that. They all even out over time, but that's not unusual, that's human. So why do we think that the same practices, whether it's from XP, from RUP, from Scrum, why do we think that those apply universally? They don't necessarily. But what they do provide is a framework, or at least a starting point. Well, let's start with these and see where we go. And that's exactly where XP came from. When Kent Beck was told, no, you're going to lead this rewrite. And he sat back and he consulted with Ward Cunningham and others, and just thought about what's worked, what has worked for him. And that became, over a period of a couple of years, XP. So I'm gonna make it work. You thought you could just come here, eat, listen to me drone on, fall asleep while I'm talking. Is anybody asleep right now? Yeah, because I'm waiting for the hands. Somebody in every crowd, I love it. What I would like you to do is to get into groups of 6 to 8 people, roughly. We'll see how that works, maybe even 10, with the number of people here. And we've got a bunch of sticky notes here we'll distribute for you. I'd like you to spend about 20 minutes and just amongst the group, discuss what you've done. Forget about any particular Agile method. Just go back over it. This is not a young group. It's not like Shopify, where I was the second oldest person in the company for quite a while, and the average age was probably about 23. There's lots of experience in this room. Centuries of software experience in this room. Think back over your careers, whether you're programming, doing system analysis, business analysis, project management, whatever you have done, think back to what has been effective. Things that have worked well. Maybe they worked well in one project, but you really remember that because it was something that just sticks with you. I wish I could do that again. And I'd like you to write those down, one thought per sticky note. And then we'll do kind of a quick show and tell after we're done. So if you could organize yourselves into groups, well, I'd say 10 people roughly, and distribute the sticky notes, and then we'll spend about 20 minutes going through that, okay?
Lots of exhaustive testing. Right? Lots of exhaustive testing.
Exhaustive is exhaustive.
Yes. That's everything.
Everything.
Just test the hell out of it.
So Tom, I would comment that I see the exhaustive testing fails.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes it's not
Everything
exhaustive
we're going to talk about is going to fail sometimes and succeed other times.
No, I think Dave's don't fail.
If it fails only 10% of the time, it works 90% of the time, and that's an A in whatever. 90%.
All you really
is
need is,
whatever you want to say.
all you really need is like 80%.
As a business analyst working with big requirements up front organization, you're not feeling like which is what the problem is when people do not write well. The solution is when people do write well. Because you can chatter all day long and be co-located with the customer. Not that I have done, not that I ever will co-locate in my experience. But I think investment in business analysis as the connective tissue is working for me. As dysfunctional as any organization that I've been in is I'm right now have eager to get into Agile full time, but I'm in disbelief that it's economical to educate the developers in the business aspect, you know, and again, trying to get the customers to co-locate, forget about it. I haven't seen it. So right now I'm thinking big requirements up front, excellent written documentation. I'm hoping that, you know, excellent written documentation could apply to Agile insofar as, you know, you have bugs. You know, the difference between a defect that's written well and one that isn't is night and day. So I feel like it seems like Agile is kind of more push the documentation chain towards, you know, towards reactive rather than proactive. But I personally feel like, my humble opinion, you know, regardless of your methodology, that a comprehensive, robust documentation chain from one end to the other is irreplaceable. And, you know, I'm not convinced that Agile is going to do it the way.
You should have without maintenance. Maintaining that document. It's a great document.
Okay, may I address the?
Programs I have to work on, and what I discovered was I did one, and when I was doing the second one, recognizing all the commonality early so that I could recognize what's common and then what's different in each one. And then we just continue to adapt that in a series of I guess I'll say recognizing the commonality early.
If you factor that out, you can get the reuse for a workable framework, the way they did with Rails. When they built Rails, they basically had a working application, they just pulled out the framework. It was inherent in it.
What's effective for me was documenting what I finished as I finished it. That way it's a smaller chunk that gets out of the way quickly, and the actual technical writer is ready for all this information. I can just hand all this over, and documentation and writing processes and much.
On that same many years ago, I worked in a Verge Bridge kind of water pump shop, and the development in QA obviously was kind of resources and management. So we had problems with quality going on. So I took the initiative. I'm the development manager. I wrote a test plan. Everybody's giving me grief that I'm doing this work as most QA should be doing. But that was one of the few releases we had with no bugs. So I did that initiative. Took that initiative, wrote the test plan, met with them, went over it in detail, checked in with them periodically during the test cycle, and it was completely clean release. Documenting tests. Almost the idea of like playing more of a, the way I like to call it, a community member versus being your own team.
So you want to group them into categories or?
Well, everybody's working on the same team.
Some of them are about the people, some of them are about the market. That's more process.
You want to go for another 5 minutes? 20 minutes? Retrospect. Are you good to go now?
Stopping and tearing
We're good. Everybody's good? Okay.
Rethinking. It's another way.
My fee is
Assignment release. Yeah. You couldn't have been here a couple of minutes ago.
He just wants to sit down.
So
what they actually want. And
so we have talking to people, including like interviewing and collecting info. Set a deadline, a goal, a target date, schedule milestones, don't plan too far in advance. Create what customers need, not what they ask for. Focus on what's important over meeting a deadline. Focus on functionality or other things. Ability to delete earlier attempts and start over prototyping. Writing the requirements, set the expectation if no bugs acceptable, break down tasks into smaller tasks.
Thank you.
By the time we finished, we had over 20 of them, so it kind of broke them out into 8 groups. I'll mention the 8 groups rather than go through the whole list. Okay, first of all, a lot about testing, ranging test case reviews, lots of exhaustive testing, let testers be hackers, and so on. Communication, definitely, proper code handoffs, continuous communications, and we called that constant contact. Realistic scheduling, do the requirements stated clearly, get performance requirements, abilities up front. Various development techniques, actually only 2, test-driven development and stepwise refinement came up. Resources, definitely get enough resources for everyone, including enough sleep. And last one is check usability by a naive user.
We also had a number of groupings of things that came together for us. First, I'd say, was developing an understanding of the business, preferably by having access to actual customers, sometimes co-located, but just access to people who know what's going on so you can get the feedback you need. A second theme that emerged for us was dedicated teams, teams that work on one thing, one project only, and once you've got a good gel team, don't break them up. Also a theme that emerged was iterating, having early drafts, doing successive refinement, straw man prototypes, getting to code quickly in order to test people's assumptions, and doing frequent integrations so you're not leaving anything out dangling for too long. We also found that having a team with different strengths, knowing what those strengths are and balancing them out, pairing where that's necessary or useful, and having a second pair of eyes where you bounce off ideas off each other to make sure that everyone's kept honest and works well together was very helpful. Similar to that is alternating team conversations with solo work, and a few other things such as regression testing and creating reusable common code were the themes that emerged for us.
Yeah, I'm going to try and find the similar ones as well. But so repeatable process, prototyping, constant customer feedback, working in small groups. Another theme was fixed requirements that are well written. Waterfall, which was a waterfall process, and strict adherence to CMM level 3.
Oh, so XP.
And then since I'm the speaker, I'm going to pick one of my own, which was designed by flowcharting, followed by design reviews, code off the flowcharts, test, and go back to step 1.
We have a bunch also. Established team norms, cross-training, which is kind of the opposite of what was said over there. Constant communications, establish milestones and managing expectations, prioritizing work, let me generalize this one, examine your successes as well as your failures. Observe and mentor what's really being used and not just what they say. And I'll do one more, publicize blockers.
There's sort of like high level in our list, but if I can just briefly say, so like we had specifications, meaning basically
it was in a waterfall situation. However, you know, it's just in anything, like user stories, whatever. Know what you need to provide. Planning, when there's better planning, execution is much smoother. Teamwork, you know, especially around collaboration. When people are talking to one another, it's a much better product. It works nicer. Continuous improvement, knowing the end user needs, shadowing them perhaps, you know, sitting and talking with them, and then going back to the other side, to the table to work on what you can provide. Retrospectives.
Okay, honor to have the last word. So I think we talked about a variety of things. I think we came up with quite diverse answers. So we talked about you know, spec out things completely to build things in record time, but we also talked about, you know, breaking down things into posted size of chunks. And we said there's small, well-connected team, make things better, and familiar, likable tools to support people to connect and to support processes. We also talked about prototyping with no throwaway code, as well as, you know, bring the whole business closer to customers. Those are the things I remember. We really talked about that.
Thanks. Good. So the first question I have for you after all that, did anybody hear anything there they would characterize as wrong? You just don't do that. No, of course not. And even people who said, well, this was from a waterfall environment, almost apologetically, or actually apologetically, what was described, you know, CMM Level 3, it still works. It was effective in that context. Yeah. And that's the key thing to remember is, just as XP is fantastic, as far as I'm concerned, the developer in me thinks it's the best way I've encountered for delivering software since playing with an Apple II back in high school. But that doesn't necessarily apply to all domains, all contexts, whatever. And in certain places, it does make sense. By the way, there was a person at the SEI, Mark Pock, who said that XP out of the box is essentially CMM 3 compliant. If he'd said 5, I would have gone a little further. But the key thing is you just identified all sorts of different things, some of which are touched specifically, like retrospectives in the Agile world, and others that are not. There are recommendations around things, but we just took the group wisdom here, and we didn't hear everything for time considerations, but we just realized that there's lots of different ways to accomplish delivering software. Now, the next exercise I'm going to get you to do, making you work a lot tonight, bringing all this back to the Agile world, I would like you to take the stickies as a group, each group, take your stickies up. You'll notice there are a number of sheets up on the wall over there, and if you walk by them and saw them, they might look familiar. Anybody read them, and anybody know what they are? They're the principles from the Agile Manifesto, not the values, but the principles. What I would like you to do is take the stickies, each individual sticky, and put it by the principle you think is most appropriate for that sticky. And there's a category for other down at the end for all the wrong stuff. If you don't feel that a sticky fits with any one of the principles, put it off at the end. And we'll do the experiment of seeing whether the principles actually define in some way, shape, or form what is effective, or whether effective defines where the principles came from, if you want to look at it from both angles. So we'll take about 10 minutes now. Grab your groups, grab your stickies, go up. There'll be a great big traffic jam up there.
Somewhere else? Okay.
Hear the stories?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go together very well.
We did have some that came into, I've never done this this exercise before, by the way, so it's a new experience for me. We did have a number that fell under the other section, which is fine. I saw one up there, emotional intelligence, which is actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
But the vast majority did adhere to Agile principles. Is there anybody who kind of went, yeah, it's kind of like this one, so I'll just kind of stick it here so I don't put it in other? Did anybody do that? Or were you a couple? Okay. You're honest, Michael, I like that. The goal wasn't to make sure it fits within Agile principles, it's to see how much of the effective stuff that we've done over the years actually does fit within the Agile principles. What did anybody learn? Anybody want to share what they learned?
A statement A and its inverse not A were both true, and both were considered useful processes or useful methods, and that some of the things that were found useful or successful are the opposite of some of the Agile principles. So they, again, something in its inverse both work, an Agile principle in its inverse.
Cool, thank you.
Well, there's one that came up, which, of course, it was mine, but I didn't have it before we did this exercise, and I looked at it, when I look at it, I said, oh, interesting. I'm trying to think where I put it under Agile principles, but it's let testers be hackers. It dawned on me, yeah, that's what they do.
Good move, too, yes. Cool, thank you.
Something I was thinking that the goal is good software. The process is interesting. It's a way of getting to good software.
Yes.
It's not what defines good software.
That's
and
great.
never lose sight of the good software piece of it.
Thank you. When I work with teams, I describe myself as a pragmatist when dealing with this. The process, the process is important, but it's a means to an end. The end that's truly important, because that's what is providing value to whoever it is that's consuming what you're building. Anyone else? Ron?
I noticed that, and that's how other people do it, which one? So it means that a lot of the practices we do span some of the principles.
Absolutely.
Well, it made me feel good to know that just because you're not immersed in Agile at this point in time, and other methodologies that you've used and the experience that you have still can be valuable and helpful in the process.
Cool, thank you. Other people have come up with as effective that they hadn't thought of before. Cool. Any other observations? As I said, when I'm coaching, I try to be as much a pragmatist as possible. I've been the zealot. That doesn't work so well. It works when you say, well, here's this extreme programming stuff. Why don't we give that a try and see how it goes? That works somewhat well. But when you have people that say, well, no, you have to pair 100% of the time to be effective. You have to use, you always have to have tests written before, unit tests written before you write production code to be effective. Writing them at the same time, no, that's not effective. And any other litany of things that have come up as people saying, well, that can't possibly work because it's not in the, not written that way in the books. We have been building software for a pretty long time. It's not an engineering discipline yet. It may someday be. It's still more of a creative discipline right now, and that's fine. And just like there are in any creative activity, there are a myriad of ways to accomplish what it is you're trying to accomplish. It's the same with software. But when you're building software for someone to consume in some way, shape, or form, again, it's the end that's important, the value that's being delivered, and delivering that value sustainably for as long as it's needed for the people who are going to consume it. And again, throwing different domains out there. If I'm Canadian, therefore, I was born loving hockey. Sorry, just, you know, it's like baseball here. On PlayStation, I play the NHL games that come out. EA Sports, now there's lots of bad things that happen with the game companies, but they're not going to spend a whole lot of time fixing bugs in NHL 12 because NHL 13 is coming out. And they're not going to spend a whole lot of time fixing bugs in NHL 13 because NHL 14 is coming out. Sometimes in a completely different code base. There's a domain where, you know, you're done. Get rid of it. There might be some first day showstoppers that they put out an update for, but usually there's only one update for software like that. Now compare that to something that you're using constantly. Google, Gmail, Facebook, where you're constantly making updates, delivering more and more value, however value is defined by the people who consume the software. And that's a much different set of circumstances. If you ever have the chance, look up Facebook release engineering, and there's a guy, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I have his picture on my computer, I can show you. But he's kind of one of those, he looks kind of scary crazy, and you don't want to make him mad by adding bugs to the software. But they have a very interesting way of doing ringed deployments and all that. And again, that fits their business model. I talked about Shopify. I was having a discussion while we were going through the exercise about when I worked in Canada's version of Homeland Security, Canada Border Services Agency, using XP writing software there, but we did spend more time doing some upfront work in terms of dealing with the analysts who would be using the software to track bad people. And it was important to do that because we kind of wanted to get this stuff right. We didn't want to make silly mistakes that would allow bad people to get into the country. And just from domain to domain to domain, there are different aspects of it. Nancy Van Schuenwart and I were talking about working, I did some coaching in telecom and working with teams developing FPGAs, which are kind of software, hardware-ish, mushyware kind of thing. But the people who group I worked with, they had worked in what's called the ASIC world, where application-specific integrated circuits. If they made one mistake, it could cost $30 million. One bug in their software, in the chip. They brought that discipline with them when they started working in FPGAs, where you could flash new software on it constantly, but they still worked with the discipline of anything greater than 0 defects is unacceptable. And they were as fast as any team I've seen. They were an excellent, excellent team. Now they were an excellent team before they learned anything about Agile, and they latched onto a lot of stuff. They were doing a form of TDD, test-driven development, with FPGAs. They did a form of pairing with a verification person, which is, it's not exactly testing because that person is writing code that's going to test the code that the other person, the development engineer, wrote. And they moved very quickly. When they started working in smaller chunks and using an agile process, they actually went a lot faster. It didn't take them long to realize that they were going a lot faster building their stuff out, and it was phenomenal quality. At one point in time, they were over a month ahead of the software team that was going to be writing software against their chip. The software team was still in PowerPoint. They hadn't even gotten to the point of having software. The hardware guys were going along. Has anybody ever worked in the embedded world where the software people are sitting, scratching their heads, waiting for the hardware to come? Yeah, exactly. So, these are all different domains and different forms of effective practices, effective ways of working within those domains, within different teams, even in the same domains. And really what I wanted to get to in the exercises tonight and this whole session is that there's no one way of doing things. And a lot of us, especially when we have experience, we've already been there, we've already done some of these effective things. It's great to try something new, but make sure that you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. This is me, all sorts of different places. Feel free to contact me anytime you want. I can provide these and provide PDF slides. Not a whole lot of meat in the slides, just some information, but if you want contact information. There was talk about people needing coaches. I literally finished a gig this morning. And after I get done the honeydew list this coming week at home, then I'm looking for work again. I don't see Dennis Crowley anymore. Anyway, that's beside the point. So again, feel free to contact me if you have any questions. I'm always on Twitter. I have a blog called Practical Agility, and always love to discuss things with you. I always want to learn more, and the more I get a chance to interact with people, the more I'm able to learn, and hopefully provide some to everyone else. So, any questions? Yes?
You mentioned when Waterfall came in, and a lot of people mentioned about the old days of Waterfall. Probably go far back enough. Before the Waterfall paper came out and was adopted, what was the dominant software development paradigm then?
I did a presentation in Rochester, New York, about 10 years ago at a company there. They wanted to find out more about this radical new stuff. And one of the attendees was the big boss, the CIO was there. And I hesitate to say older gentleman, but I went through this whole presentation about extreme programming, and he said, huh, that's a lot like the way I used to work in the 70s. Now, that was, Waterfall in 1970 was defined by Winston Royce working for the IBM Federal Systems Division for Defense, D&D, or DoD work here. So it was in a very specific area. But he was working, side by side with somebody pounding software out when he was a young developer. And so there's a lot of what goes around comes around. And try explaining that to 22-year-olds. But we can learn from our past. Test-driven development, the origins of that, after, I recently saw it written how Kent Beck and Ward Cunningham reinvented or rediscovered, I can't remember the exact term, test-driven development. Well, Jerry Weinberg talked about using something very similar on the Mercury space program when they were writing software, because they had no idea how to do what they needed to do, so they were experimenting constantly. And essentially they're saying, well, we needed to do this, and they represented that by some tests, or whether it was a physical test harness, or however it was done. And then they wrote software that made the test pass. And that was 1959, 1960. So there's a lot of what we've done here. Pair programming, again, going back to military industrial stuff. A gentleman named Randall Jensen was working with the Air Force in the mid-70s, 1975. He started doing real quantitative tests on what he called two-person teams. He had two developers working together constantly. And his conclusions, which he wrote up, he ran that till I think 1981, if anyone's ever heard of it. And he wrote it up in Crosstalk magazine from Air Force Software. And what he found is essentially identical to what we found out later on. Lori Williams' work on pair programming and such. It's almost identical, except predates it by close to 20 years. And so there's a lot of things. Pure chaos. Just pack something. Just get it out. Just get it out. To more disciplined and such over time. Okay. Anyone else? Question?
Can we do other questions after the session?
Yeah, sure.
So thank you very much, Dave.
Thanks, everybody.